Sarah Martinez stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the upscale Italian restaurant, her hands gripping the cool porcelain sink. At 34, she still turned heads, dark auburn hair that fell in natural waves past her shoulders, green eyes that held depths of experiences both beautiful and painful, and a figure that 3 pregnancies had changed but not diminished. Yet tonight, like so many nights before, she felt utterly invisible. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, a text from her best friend Monica asking how the date was going, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to look at it. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her navy dress, the one she'd bought specifically for this occasion, spending money she really shouldn't have, and forced herself to walk back to the table where her blind date waited. Marcus Henderson stood when she approached, and Sarah had to admit Monica had done well in the looks department. He was handsome in that polished corporate way, sharp jawline, perfectly styled hair with distinguished gray at the temples, expensive suit that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. But as she slid back into her seat, she could already feel the familiar weight of inadequacy settling over her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Marcus was a divorced corporate lawyer with no children, Monica had said. Someone stable, successful, ready for a serious relationship. Sarah wondered what Monica had told him about her. Probably the sanitized version. Definitely not the whole truth. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, his smile revealing perfectly white teeth. Of course they were perfect. Everything about him screamed perfection, control, a life that ran smoothly on well-oiled tracks. "Fine," Sarah replied, reaching for her water glass to give her hands something to do. "Sorry about that." The conversation had been pleasant enough before her escape to the bathroom. They'd covered the basics, his work in corporate law, her job as a pediatric nurse at County General, his love of golf, well, she hadn't gotten to much about herself. That was by design. Every topic felt like a minefield. Hobbies? She couldn't remember the last time she'd had time for one. Interests? Her boys were her interest, her entire world, and somehow she suspected that admitting her life revolved around 3 rambunctious 9-year-old triplets wouldn't score points with Marcus. "So," Marcus said, leaning back with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling boardrooms, "Monica mentioned you work at County General. That must be rewarding work." "It is," Sarah said, and for a moment genuine warmth crept into her voice. She loved her job, loved the children she cared for, even on the hardest days. Challenging, exhausting, sometimes heartbreaking, but yes, rewarding. "I admire that," Marcus said, taking a sip of his wine, some expensive vintage he'd ordered without consulting her, though she hadn't minded. She knew nothing about wine anyway. "I have to admit, I couldn't do it. All that chaos, the emotional toll. I need order in my life, you know? Structure, predictability." Something cold settled in Sarah's stomach. Structure, predictability, words that had no place in her life, not anymore. Not since the moment the ultrasound technician had gasped 3 years into her marriage and said, "Wait, I'm seeing 3 heartbeats." Not since David had walked out 18 months later, overwhelmed by the reality of 3 crying infants, 3 sets of needs, 3 times the responsibility he'd bargained for. "I understand that," Sarah said quietly, pushing her pasta around her plate. She'd barely eaten. Her appetite had fled somewhere around the time Marcus started talking about his minimalist apartment and his carefully curated life. "Structure is nice." "You seem distracted," Marcus observed, and there was a hint of impatience in his tone. "Is the food not good?" "No, it's excellent," Sarah said quickly, taking a bite to prove it. And it was. This restaurant was far nicer than anywhere she'd been in years. The prices on the menu had made her stomach clench with anxiety, even though Marcus had insisted he was paying. She'd tried to protest, but he'd waved her off with the casual generosity of someone for whom money was no object. For Sarah, every dollar was an object. Every expense was calculated against school supplies, groceries, the ever-growing pile of bills that seemed to multiply like rabbits. Marcus leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. Look, I'll be honest with you, Sarah. Monica spoke very highly of you, and you're clearly a beautiful, intelligent woman. But I'm at a point in my life where I know what I want. I want a partner I can travel with, someone who can join me for client dinners without worrying about rushing home, someone who can be spontaneous, take off for a long weekend in Napa, that sort of thing. Can you be that person? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah felt something inside her crack, a fissure in the carefully maintained wall she'd built around her heart. She thought of her boys, Ethan, Lucas, and Noah, probably giving her mother hell right now as they refused to go to bed on time. She thought of how Ethan had clung to her this morning, his small arms tight around her neck, asking if she really had to go out tonight. She thought of Lucas's tears when she'd tried to explain what a date was, and Noah's quiet withdrawal, the way he'd turned his face away when she'd tried to kiss him goodbye. "No," Sarah heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, I can't be that person." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "I'm sorry?" Louder now, with a certainty that surprised her, Sarah repeated, "I can't be that person. I appreciate the honesty, Marcus, I do, but I need to be honest too." She took a breath, feeling years of shame and loneliness bubbling to the surface. "I have 3 sons, triplets. They're 9 years old and they're my entire world. I can't take spontaneous trips to Napa. I can barely afford to keep them in shoes that fit because they grow so fast. I work night shifts at the hospital because it pays more, and my mother watches them while I'm gone, and I haven't had a full night of sleep in nearly a decade. Client dinners? I'm usually having dinner at 6:30 with 3 boys who argue about everything from who gets which plate to whether broccoli is actually edible or a government conspiracy." She was on a roll now, unable to stop even as she saw Marcus's expression shift from surprise to something like alarm. "My ex-husband left us when the boys were 18 months old because he couldn't handle it. 3 was too many, he said. Too much noise, too much chaos, too much everything. And you know what? He was right. My life is chaos. It's mess and noise and constant overwhelming need. There's no structure, no predictability. Some days I'm so tired I cry in my car before I can even make it home. Some days I wonder if I'm completely failing them, if I'm enough, if I'll ever be enough." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she didn't care. Let Marcus see. Let everyone in this fancy restaurant see. "So no, Marcus, I can't be the person you want. No one wants to date me, and I'm sorry Monica wasted your time. I'm sorry I wasted my own time thinking this could ever work." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Several nearby diners turned to look, but Sarah was past caring. She grabbed her clutch, pulling out 2 20s, money she'd tucked away just in case, money that was supposed to go towards Lucas's new glasses, and threw it on the table, her voice shaking. "That should cover my meal. I hope you find what you're looking for, Marcus. I really do." And then she was walking, weaving between tables with as much dignity as she could muster while tears blurred her vision. She made it outside into the cool night air before the sobs really hit, great heaving gasps that shook her whole body. She leaned against the brick wall of the building, not caring that it probably ruined her dress, not caring about anything except the crushing weight of her loneliness and the certainty that this was her life now, this would always be her life. "Ma'am?" a voice cut through her crying. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Sarah looked up to see a valet, a young man, barely out of his teens, looking at her with concern. She tried to speak, to say she was fine, but only another sob came out. "Do you need me to call someone?" he asked gently. Sarah shook her head, fumbling in her clutch for her phone. She needed to call an Uber. She needed to get home to her boys, to the only people in the world who wanted her, who needed her, who loved her unconditionally, even when she felt completely unlovable. As the Uber pulled up, Sarah let herself feel the full weight of her confession. She'd said it out loud finally, the truth she'd been carrying for 3 years, the fear that kept her up at night even when the boys were finally, blessedly asleep. No one wants to date me. No one wants this life. No one wants us." The Uber pulled up and Sarah climbed in, giving the driver her address in a hoarse whisper. As the city lights blurred past the window, she thought about going home, facing her mother's inevitable questions, checking on 3 sleeping boys whose entire world rested on her shoulders. She thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days stretching endlessly ahead, days of doing this alone, of being enough even when she felt like nothing, of loving with a fierce, protective intensity that left no room for anyone else. By the time the Uber pulled up to her small house, in a working-class neighborhood far from fancy restaurants and fancy men, Sarah had stopped crying. She'd wiped her face, fixed her smudged makeup as best she could, and built her walls back up. This was fine, she was fine. She had her boys, and they had her, and that. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the pediatric ward break room at 2 a.m, staring blankly at the coffee maker as it gurgled and hissed. It had been a brutal shift. A car accident had brought in 3 children, 2 of whom were now stable, but 1 still in surgery. Sarah had held the hand of the youngest, a 6-year-old girl named Emma, as they'd wheeled her away, promising her that everything would be okay. She never made promises she couldn't keep, but sometimes you had to lie to make a terrified child feel safe. "Rough night?" Dr. Patricia Chin asked, coming into the break room with the exhausted shuffle of someone 12 hours into a 16-hour shift. "Emma Caldwell," Sarah said quietly, pouring coffee into a mug someone had left in the sink. She'd rinse it later. Maybe. "The car accident." Patricia nodded grimly. "Dr. Morrison is good. If anyone can save her, he can." "I know." Sarah took a sip of coffee and winced. It was terrible, burnt and bitter, but it was caffeine, and that was all that mattered. "I keep thinking about her mother's face, the way she looked at me, like I could promise her that her baby would be okay." "And could you?" Patricia asked, gently. "I told her we'd do everything we could." Sarah rubbed her eyes, careful not to smudge the minimal makeup she wore for work. "Same thing we always say." She studied her for a long moment. "You look exhausted, Sarah. More than usual." "Thanks," Sarah said with a weak attempt at humor. "Just what every woman wants to hear." "I'm serious. When was the last time you took a day off? An actual day off, not just switching shifts around so you can catch a few hours of sleep between school runs and baseball practice?" Sarah couldn't remember. The hospital was chronically understaffed, especially on night shift, and she needed the differential pay. "I'm fine, Pat. Just tired." "You're always tired." Patricia poured her own coffee, leaning against the counter with a sigh. "Look, I know it's not my business, but you can't pour from an empty cup. Those boys of yours need you healthy." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting a text from her mother, probably Ethan having a nightmare again, but instead saw a notification from the boys' school, a reminder that parent-teacher conferences were next week. Sarah's heart sank. Another thing to schedule, another place she needed to be, another moment when she'd have to face teachers who would try to be understanding about Noah's silence in class, Lucas's difficulty focusing, Ethan's anxiety that made him throw up before tests. "Everything okay?" Patricia asked. "Yeah, just school stuff." Sarah tucked her phone away, taking another sip of terrible coffee. "Parent-teacher conferences." "How are the boys doing?" "They're managing." It was the most honest answer Sarah could give. The boys were managing. They were smart, healthy, loved, but they were also struggling in ways that kept Sarah up at night. Noah had barely spoken in school all year, answering questions only when directly called on, and even then with single words. Lucas had so much energy he literally couldn't sit still, and his teachers had gently suggested testing for ADHD. And Ethan, her sensitive firstborn, carried anxiety like a weight on his small shoulders, worrying about everything from Sarah's safety when she worked night shifts to whether they had enough money for groceries. "That's a mother's 'they're not really okay, but I can't fall apart' voice," Patricia observed. Sarah let out a long breath. "They miss having a father. especially Noah. He's just shut down since David left. Lucas acts out because he's angry, and Ethan tries so hard to be the man of the house that it breaks my heart. They're 9 years old, Patricia said softly. They shouldn't have to carry any of that. I know. Sarah's voice cracked. I know, but what am I supposed to do? I can't make David come back. I can't give them what they need when I'm working 60 hours a week just to keep us afloat. I can't be both parents, Pat. I've tried, and I can't. Patricia moved closer, putting a hand on Sarah's shoulder. You're doing the best you can. Anyone can see that. My best isn't enough. The words came out bitter, angry. My best has one son who won't talk, another who can't sit still, and a third who has anxiety attacks about things that shouldn't worry a child. My best has me so exhausted I barely function. My best has me crying in break rooms at 2 in the morning. Sarah. A sharp knock on the break room door interrupted them. One of the other nurses, Janie, stuck her head in. Sarah, sorry, but there's a man here asking for you. Says it's important. Sarah's blood ran cold. Important at 2 in the morning was never good news. Did he say what it's about? Something about your kid's school. He said his name is Alex Winters. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but the mention of school had her moving immediately, following Jamie down the hallway with her heart pounding. Had something happened? Had her mother called the school? Were the boys okay? The man waiting in the hallway near the nurse's station looked as exhausted as Sarah felt. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and eyes that held the particular brand of tired that comes from caring for children. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, rumpled like he'd thrown them on in a hurry, and when he saw Sarah approaching, relief flooded his face. "Sarah Martinez?" he asked. "Yes. What's this about? Are my boys okay?" "Your boys are fine," he quickly said, holding up his hands. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I'm Alex Winters. My sons go to Riverside Elementary with your boys, Ethan, Lucas, and Noah, right?" Sarah nodded slowly, her panic receding but confusion taking its place. "Yes. I'm sorry, but why are you here, at the hospital, at 2 in the morning?" Alex ran a hand through his hair, confirming Sarah's suspicion about the source of its dishevelment. "This is going to sound insane, but I need your help. Well, not your help exactly, your son's help." "I'm sorry? What? Can we sit down somewhere? This is complicated, and I've been up for 20 hours straight, and I'm not explaining this well." Sarah glanced at the clock. She had 15 minutes left on her break. "There's a waiting area this way." She led him to a small, empty waiting room, one of the family consultation rooms that was blessedly private. They sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs across from each other, and Sarah waited, her nurse's instincts cataloging everything about this man. Exhausted, but not ill. Worried, but not panicked. There were paint stains on his jeans and what looked like glitter in his hair. "Okay," Sarah said. "Explain." Alex took a breath. "I'm a single father. I have 3 sons, James, Tyler, and Connor. Triplets. They're 9, same age as your boys." Something in Sarah's chest tightened. Triplets. Single father. She knew that particular flavor of exhaustion now. "There's a school project, 4th grade, Mrs. Peterson's class. The boys have to work in groups of 6 for some kind of community project presentation. It's worth a huge portion of their grade, and the groups were assigned 3 weeks ago." "I know about the project," Sarah said. Ethan had mentioned it, worried about working with kids he didn't know well. "Right, so my boys were assigned to a group with your boys, 6 kids total, the 3 of mine and the 3 of yours." Alex leaned forward, his expression desperate. "Mrs. Peterson called me tonight. Well, yesterday evening. Apparently, the project is due Monday, and my boys haven't been participating at all. They've been shutting down, refusing to work with the group, and your boys have basically been doing everything themselves." Sarah frowned. "I haven't heard anything about this." "Mrs. Peterson said she sent emails, but—" Alex trailed off, looking embarrassed. "But I work nights, and I'm barely holding it together, so I probably missed them," Sarah finished for him, feeling the familiar guilt creep in. "Okay, so what do you need from me?" Mrs. Peterson said if the project isn't completed and all 6 boys aren't participating, they're all going to fail this assignment, which would tank their grades. And apparently, your boys are really upset about my boys not helping, and my boys are upset because he stopped, his jaw working like the words were hard to get out. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. My boys are struggling. Their mother died 2 years ago, and they're not handling it well. James has become aggressive, Tyler has anxiety, and Connor barely speaks. I've had them in therapy, but it's slow going, and they don't make friends easily. They don't trust easily. Sarah felt her heart break a little. I'm so sorry. The thing is, Mrs. Peterson said something interesting. She said that your son, Noah, I think, he's quiet too, doesn't talk much in class. And somehow, in the few times the groups worked together, Connor and Noah, Alex's voice got rough, they connected. She said she saw Connor actually smile, actually interact. It's the first time in 2 years he's done that with anyone outside our family. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. Noah, her silent, withdrawn boy who carried his pain so quietly she sometimes didn't know how to reach him. And James, my oldest, he's angry all the time. Angry at me, angry at the world, angry at God for taking his mother. But apparently, he and your son Lucas got into some kind of argument during the last group meeting, and Lucas didn't back down. He pushed back, and James actually laughed. Mrs. Peterson said it was the first time she'd heard him laugh all year. Lucas doesn't back down from anything, Sarah said softly, thinking of her firecracker middle son. And Tyler, he's so anxious he makes himself sick. He threw up before the last group meeting because he was so nervous. But your son Ethan sat with him, apparently, talked to him about breathing exercises. Mrs. Peterson said Ethan told Tyler he gets anxious too, and that it's okay to be scared. Sarah pressed her mouth to her hand, overwhelmed. Her boys, her beautiful, struggling boys had been helping these other struggling children, and she hadn't even known. So here's what I'm asking, Alex said, his eyes meeting Sarah's with raw honesty. Tomorrow is Saturday. I know you're probably exhausted, and I know this is insane, but could we get the boys together, let them work on this project? Because I think maybe they need each other. I think maybe, his voice cracked, I think maybe our boys can help each other in ways we can't help them ourselves. Sarah should say no. She should go home after her shift, sleep for a few hours, take care of her own children, maintain the carefully controlled boundaries of her life. But she looked at this man, this single father of triplets, who understood, who knew what it was like to be drowning and desperate and willing to try anything to help your children, and she found herself nodding. Okay, she whispered. Okay, yes, where and when? Relief washed over Alex's face so completely that he sagged in his chair. Thank you. God, thank you. My place, around noon? I'll text you the address. Do you have a card, or… Sarah pulled out her phone and they exchanged numbers, both of them moving with the efficiency of parents who had learned to make quick decisions and follow through. As Alex stood to leave, he paused. I know this is strange, showing up at your workplace in the middle of the night, but Mrs. Peterson said if I didn't figure something out by Monday, all 6 boys would fail, and I can't let my boys fail at one more thing. They've lost too much already. I understand, Sarah said, and she did, completely. We'll be there tomorrow, noon. After Alex left, Sarah sat alone in the waiting room for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Another single parent of triplets. What were the odds? And their boys somehow connecting through shared pain and struggle. Noah smiling, Lucas making another boy laugh, and Ethan helping someone else with anxiety. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Alex. This is my address. And seriously, thank you. You have no idea what this means. Sarah saved the number and stared at the message. She had given up hope 3 weeks ago in that restaurant. She had decided no one would ever want her life, her chaos, her beautiful mess. And now here was someone who didn't just understand that life, he was living it too. She went back to work, but for the first time in months, something had shifted in her chest. Not hope, exactly, not yet, but maybe the possibility of not being quite so alone. Sarah pulled up to the address Alex had sent her, and for a moment she just sat in her aging Honda staring at the small house. It was similar to hers. Modest, probably built in the 70s, in a neighborhood where people mowed their own lawns and knew their neighbors' names. The yard was decent enough, though the grass needed mowing, and there were toys scattered across the porch. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway, the net torn and hanging limply. In the back seat, her boys were unusually quiet. She'd told them that morning about the project, about meeting Alex's sons, and the reactions had been varied. Lucas had been excited, bouncing around the kitchen and talking a mile a minute about how James was actually pretty cool, even though he was kind of mean sometimes. Ethan had worried, of course, asking if she was sure it was okay, if the other boys would like them, if they'd do something wrong, and Noah had simply looked at her with those solemn eyes and nodded once before going back to his cereal. "Okay, boys," Sarah said, turning around to look at them. "I need you to be on your best behavior, all right? This is important." "We know, Mom," Lucas said, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "You said that like 100 times." "I mean it, Lucas. No fighting, no arguing about—" "We'll be good," Ethan interrupted softly. "We promise." Noah said nothing, but his eyes met Sarah's in the rearview mirror, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Anticipation. Her silent boy was anticipating something, and that alone made this worth it. They climbed out of the car, Lucas racing ahead while Ethan walked more slowly, and Noah stuck close to Sarah's side. Before they reached the porch, the front door opened, and Alex appeared, looking decidedly more put together than he had at 2 in the morning. He wore clean jeans and a t-shirt that had definitely seen better days, and his hair was damp like he'd recently showered. Behind him, Sarah could see 3 boys peering around his legs, 3 faces that mirrored each other in the way only identical triplets could. "You made it," Alex said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "Come in, please." Sarah ushered her boys inside, into a living room that looked remarkably like her own. Clean enough, but cluttered with the evidence of children. Legos scattered across the coffee table, backpacks dumped by the door, shoes in a pile that suggested someone had meant to put them away, but had gotten distracted. The walls were covered with children's artwork, and Sarah noticed that many of the drawings included 4 figures, 3 small, 1 tall, but no second adult. Her heart ached. "Boys, you remember Mrs. Martinez from school functions," Alex said, gesturing to his sons, "and these are her sons, Ethan, Lucas, and Noah." The 6 boys stared at each other in that way children do, sizing each other up. Sarah could see the similarities now. James, the tallest of Alex's boys, had the same lean build as Lucas, though where Lucas bounced with energy, James stood rigid, his jaw set in what looked like permanent defiance. Tyler, slightly smaller, had the anxious eyes Sarah recognized from Ethan's face when he was worried about something. And Connor, the 3rd boy, stood slightly apart from his brothers, his gaze locked on Noah. "Why don't you boys go work in the kitchen?" Alex suggested. "I set up the dining table with all the project materials." The boys moved slowly, awkwardly, into the kitchen. Sarah could hear them shuffling around, the scrape of chairs on linoleum, uncomfortable silence punctuated by Lucas's inevitable attempt at conversation. "So, what part of the project did you guys start with?" Alex gestured for Sarah to sit on the couch, taking the armchair across from her. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I have juice boxes, but I'm guessing those are more for the kids." "I'm fine, thank you." Sarah perched on the edge of the couch, hyper-aware of being in a stranger's home, of her boys in the other room, of this entire surreal situation. Have they really not worked on the project at all? Alex rubbed his face. "Not exactly. They've avoided it. I tried to help them, but every time I brought it up, James would get angry, Tyler would get anxious, and Connor would just shut down. I didn't push because I've learned that pushing doesn't work with them. It just makes everything worse." "I understand that," Sarah said quietly. She did. Noah couldn't be pushed. Lucas needed careful handling when his energy tipped into defiance. Ethan's anxiety spiraled if I pressured him too much. I should have been on top of this, Alex continued, and Sarah heard the self-recrimination in his voice, the same voice she used on herself in her darkest moments. But work has been insane, and Tyler had a breakdown last week about something at school, and James got in a fight, and I'm just trying to keep all the plates spinning, you know? I know, Sarah said, and suddenly she was talking, words spilling out before she could stop them. I missed 5 emails from the school last month because I work nights and I sleep during the day when I can. And by the time I wake up, I have to get the boys from school and there's homework and dinner and baths and bedtime. And somewhere in there, I'm supposed to check email and do laundry and be a functional human being. But I can't. I can't keep track of everything. Alex was nodding, his expression one of complete understanding. Last week, I sent them to school in pajamas because I was so tired I didn't even notice until Tyler's teacher called me. Pajamas, and not even matching pajamas. Despite everything, Sarah felt a laugh bubble up. Last month, I packed them all peanut butter sandwiches and then got a call from the school nurse because Lucas is allergic to peanuts. I'm his mother. I know he's allergic, but I was so exhausted, I forgot. How do you do it? Alex asked, suddenly leaning forward. Working nights? Raising them alone? How do you manage? Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't. I mean, I do, but barely. Most days I feel like I'm failing, like I'm not enough, like I can't give them what they need. Their father doesn't help? Their father left when they were 18 months old, said 3 was too many, too much. He sends a check once a month, most months, but otherwise, Sarah shrugged, trying to make it seem like it didn't matter, like the abandonment hadn't carved a hole in her heart and in her sons' lives. I'm sorry, Alex said, and the sincerity in his voice made Sarah's throat tight. I can't imagine walking away from them. What about you? Sarah asked, needing to shift the focus away from her own pain. You said their mother passed? Alex's face changed, grief settling over his features like a familiar coat. Car accident. 2 years ago this October. Drunk driver ran a red light. She died on impact. His voice was flat, reciting facts he'd said too many times. The boys were at school. I had to pick them up and tell them that their mother was never coming home. They were 7 years old. Oh, God, Sarah whispered. Alex, I'm so sorry. The first year I don't remember most of it, honestly. Family helped, friends helped, but eventually everyone goes back to their own lives, and you're left alone with 3 grieving children and your own grief that you can't even process because you have to be strong for them. His words hammered against Sarah's defenses, each one a stab of recognition. He looked at Sarah, and in his eyes she saw a reflection of her own exhaustion, her own desperation, her own determination. So I get it, the barely managing, the feeling like you're failing, the nights when you cry in your car or your closet or the shower because you can't let them see you break. From the kitchen came a sudden burst of noise, Lucas's voice raised, then James's, then what sounded like someone slamming their hand on the table. Both Sarah and Alex jumped up, hurrying into the kitchen. The scene before them was chaotic, but not quite a disaster. James stood with his arms crossed, glaring at Lucas, who glared right back. Tyler looked like he might cry. Connor and Noah sat slightly apart, watching the confrontation with wide eyes, and Ethan stood between Lucas and James, his small hands raised in a peacemaking gesture. "What's going on?" Alex asked, his voice firm but not angry. "He says the project is stupid and he doesn't want to do it, but we have to do it or we all fail, and I'm not failing because of him." "James," Alex said, a warning in his tone. "It is stupid," James shot back. "It's a stupid project for a stupid class, and I don't care if I fail." "You care," Ethan said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. Sarah's gentle son, her peacemaker, spoke with surprising firmness. "You care, or you wouldn't be so mad about it. Being mad means you care. James's face flushed. You don't know anything about me. I know you're sad and angry and you don't know what to do with it, so you're mean to everyone. But being mean doesn't make the sad go away, it just makes everyone else sad too. The silence that followed was deafening. James's face crumpled for just a moment, a crack in his armor, before he rebuilt it, but not before Sarah saw the tears in his eyes. Ethan's right, Noah said, and everyone turned to stare because Noah never spoke, especially not to people he barely knew. Being mean doesn't help. Connor, still sitting next to Noah, nodded slowly. Look, Lucas said, his energy shifting from confrontational to something more genuine. I get it. Stuff sucks sometimes. Our dad left us because he didn't want us. That sucks. Your mom died. That really sucks. But we still have to do this project, and we could either fight about it and all feel worse, or we could just do it and get it over with. Lucas, Sarah started, but Alex held up a hand, shaking his head slightly. Wait, he seemed to be saying. Let them work this out. Tyler, who had been quiet until now, spoke up in a trembling voice. I don't want to fail. I can't fail. I'm already failing everything else. You're not failing everything else, Ethan said immediately, moving to sit next to Tyler. Mrs. Peterson said you got an A on the last math test. Really? Tyler looked surprised. Yeah, she announced the top scores, remember? You were one of them. James uncrossed his arms slowly, some of the rigidity leaving his posture. Fine, we'll do the stupid project, but I'm not pretending to be happy about it. No one's asking you to be happy, Lucas said, grinning. Just asking you not to be a complete jerk. Lucas, Sarah said, warningly, but she saw the corner of James's mouth twitch, almost like he wanted to smile. All right, Alex said, clapping his hands together. Let's start over. You've got the project assignment. What's the plan? The boys turned back to the materials spread across the table, poster boards, markers, a laptop open to a shared document that was mostly blank. Tyler pulled out the assignment sheet, reading aloud in a shaky voice. Create a presentation on an issue affecting our community and propose a solution. Must include research, visual aids, and a group presentation plan. What issue did you guys choose? Alex asked. The boys looked at each other. We didn't, Ethan admitted. We couldn't agree. Okay, so that's step one. What issues affect our community? For the next 20 minutes, Sarah and Alex watched as the 6 boys, haltingly, awkwardly, but genuinely, began to work together. Lucas suggested homelessness, having seen people sleeping on the streets near their school. Tyler worried it was too big a problem. James said most problems are too big, so why bother? Ethan suggested they could focus on one specific aspect. Connor, in the quietest voice, mentioned that there was a food bank near their house that his dad took him to sometimes. The food bank, Noah repeated, looking at Connor with interest. Connor nodded, speaking barely above a whisper. We volunteer there sometimes. Dad says it helps people who don't have enough food. Food insecurity, Ethan said, perking up. That's something we learned about in social studies. Lots of kids at our school get free lunch because their families need help with food. I get free lunch, Lucas said, matter-of-factly. Mom doesn't make enough money for us not to. Sarah felt her face flush with shame, but when she glanced at Alex, there was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. That's actually a really good topic, James said, slowly, reluctantly. It's specific enough that we can actually do something about it, but it's also important. We could organize a food drive, Tyler suggested, his anxiety seeming to ease as the project took shape. And research why food insecurity happens and who it affects, Ethan added. And make posters showing statistics, Lucas jumped in, already reaching for markers. Noah and Connor, seated side by side, were looking at something on the laptop. Noah's fingers moved over the keyboard, searching for information, while Connor pointed things out. It was the most animated Sarah had seen her son in months. Sarah looked at Alex and found him already looking at her, wonder written across his face. They're actually doing it, he mouthed. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They were doing it, 6 broken boys from 2 broken families, finding a way to work together, to help each other, to be more than the sum of their sadness. For the next 2 hours, Sarah and Alex sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly supervising, but mostly just watching their sons come alive. There were still disagreements. James and Lucas bickered about where to put information on the poster, Tyler had a moment of panic when he thought they were running out of time, and Connor, at one point, got overwhelmed and had to take a break. But Noah followed him, sitting quietly in the corner where Connor had retreated, and after a few minutes they both came back. When the boys finally took a break, spreading across the living room floor with juice boxes and snacks Alex provided, Sarah and Alex found themselves alone in the kitchen, cleaning up markers and poster board scraps. "Thank you for this," Alex said, quietly. "Seriously, I know you probably had a million other things to do today." "I had laundry and grocery shopping and cleaning," Sarah smiled slightly. "Trust me, this is better." "Can I ask you something?" Alex leaned against the counter, his expression serious. "That night at the restaurant, before I came to the hospital, Monica mentioned you'd gone on a date. How did it go?" Sarah's smile faded. "You know Monica?" "She works with my brother. She's the one who helped arrange the whole project group thing, actually. She thought our boys might benefit from being together." He paused. "Monica felt really bad about how the date went. She said you left upset." Sarah felt shame and embarrassment wash over her. "I had a minor breakdown and walked out, told my date that no one wants to date someone like me, single mother of triplets with stretch marks and exhaustion and no spontaneity. It was not my finest moment." "Sounds like he was an idiot," Alex said bluntly. "He was honest. He knew